The Neighbor. A scary story from Reddit. Subscribe to Scary Stories Vault for great videos to relax, study, or just enjoy. It all began innocently enough. Just a couple of knocks on the wall, some loud music late at night. At first, the Hendersons brushed it off as the usual noise you might expect living in a suburban neighborhood. They had moved into their home 6 months ago, hoping for a peaceful life. The house was small but cozy, nestled in a quiet street with just a few other houses nearby. It seemed like the perfect place to raise their 2 young children, Emma and Tyler. But as the weeks passed, the disturbances from next door began to intensify. Their neighbor, a man in his late 40s named Vincent, seemed to be growing more erratic. At first, he would just play loud music into the night, the bass thumping through the walls and keeping them awake. They tried knocking on his door to ask him to turn it down, but he never answered. One night, as they were trying to sleep, they heard what sounded like furniture being thrown around. Loud bangs echoed through the wall that separated their living room from Vincent's house. Mike Henderson, the father, clenched his jaw in frustration. He had work early the next day, and the kids had school. This couldn't go on. "Mike, you need to do something, Sarah," his wife whispered to him, fear evident in her voice. "The kids can't sleep. Neither can I." Mike sighed, getting out of bed. He grabbed his robe and headed next door, determined to have a polite but firm conversation with Vincent. As he knocked on Vincent's door, the noise suddenly stopped. It was eerie, as if the moment he stepped onto the porch, the house fell into complete silence. No footsteps, no movement, just dead quiet. He knocked again, harder this time. "Vincent?" Mike called out. "Hey man, can we talk? You're making a lot of noise. It's late." Still no response. After a few moments of waiting, Mike turned to head back inside. As he stepped down from the porch, he felt a chill run down his spine. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move behind one of the upstairs windows, just a shadow, barely noticeable. He stopped in his tracks and turned fully to face the house, squinting at the window. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure standing there, watching him. But just as quickly as he noticed it, the figure disappeared into the darkness of the room. Feeling unnerved, Mike hurried back to his own house, locking the door behind him. Sarah was waiting for him in the hallway, a worried look on her face. "Well?" she asked. He didn't answer, Mike muttered, shaking his head. "But I thought I saw him watching me from the window. I don't know, maybe I imagined it." Sarah frowned, pulling her robe tighter around her. "This isn't normal, Mike. I don't feel safe." "Let's give it a few more days," Mike said, though he didn't feel as confident as he sounded. "If it keeps up, we'll call the police." But the noise didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Over the next few nights, the banging on the walls became more frequent, more violent. There were nights when they could hear shouting from Vincent's house, though they could never make out what he was saying. Emma, their 8-year-old daughter, started having nightmares, crying in the middle of the night about the man next door. Mike and Sarah began to feel trapped in their own home, constantly on edge. They tried calling Vincent's landlord, but the number they had been given was no longer in service. They called the police once, but by the time officers arrived, the noise had stopped and there was nothing they could do. Vincent wouldn't answer the door when they knocked, and without any concrete evidence, the police left, telling the Hendersons to call again if things escalated. And escalate they did. One evening, Mike returned home from work to find Sarah sitting on the couch, pale and trembling. The kids were playing upstairs, unaware of their mother's distress. "What happened?" Mike asked, rushing to her side. "He came over today," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Vincent. He just showed up at the door. I didn't let him in, of course, but he wouldn't stop talking. He was saying all these horrible things like how he knew what we were doing, that we were trying to ruin his life. He kept saying we were spying on him." Mike's heart raced. Did you call the police?" "I tried," Sarah replied, her eyes welling up with tears. "But he left before I could. I don't know what to do. Mike, I'm scared." That night, they locked all the doors and windows, double-checking everything before going to bed. Mike stayed up late, sitting by the window in the living room, watching for any sign of movement from Vincent's house. Hours passed, and the street remained quiet. He was just beginning to relax when he heard a loud crash from outside. His heart leapt into his throat as he rushed to the front door, yanking it open. He stepped out onto the porch and immediately saw what had happened. One of the large flower pots Sarah kept by the door had been smashed, the shattered ceramics scattered across the steps. Mike's eyes darted to Vincent's house. The lights were off, but the curtains in one of the upstairs windows fluttered, as if someone had just moved behind them. He hurried back inside, locking the door behind him. "Sarah," he called out, "get the kids. We're calling the police." Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing as officers stepped out to investigate. They questioned Mike and Sarah, inspected the damage, and once again knocked on Vincent's door. But just like before, there was no answer. The police told the Hendersons they would increase patrols in the area, but without any direct evidence of a crime, their hands were tied. Mike thanked them, but the pit in his stomach remained. He was right. It was 2 nights later when everything came to a head. The family was asleep when a loud bang jolted them awake. Mike shot up in bed, his heart pounding in his chest. The noise had come from downstairs. He jumped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed, motioning for Sarah to stay with the kids. "I'll check it out," he whispered, though fear clawed at his insides. As he crept downstairs, his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Had Vincent broken in? Was he finally going to confront them? A thought sent a wave of dread washing over him. When he reached the living room, his worst fear was confirmed. The front door was wide open, the lock broken. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim streetlights, was Vincent. He wasn't just standing there. He was staring directly at Mike, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. His eyes were wild, crazed, and his chest heaved with labored breaths. "What the hell are you doing?" Mike shouted, gripping the bat tighter. "Get out of my house!" Vincent took a step forward, his grin widening. "I know what you've been doing," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You've been watching me, spying on me. You've been watching me, spying on me. You think I don't know. I'm not stupid." Mike's pulse raced. "I don't know what you're talking about, but you need to leave." But Vincent didn't leave. He lunged. Mike swung the bat, connecting with Vincent's shoulder. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back, but it didn't stop him. Vincent charged again, this time tackling Mike to the floor. The 2 men struggled, grappling in the darkness, knocking over furniture as they fought. Sarah screamed from upstairs, and within moments she was there, holding the phone, frantically calling the police. "Mike!" she cried, but he was too focused on trying to fend off Vincent to respond. Vincent's hands closed around Mike's throat, squeezing, cutting off his air. Mike gasped, thrashing beneath him, his vision starting to blur. Desperately, he reached out, grabbing the bat he had dropped and swung it with all his remaining strength. The bat connected with Vincent's head, and he slumped to the side, momentarily dazed. Mike scrambled to his feet, dragging Vincent's limp form toward the door. He managed to shove him outside just as the sound of police sirens grew louder, the red and blue lights illuminating the street. The police arrived in force this time, tackling Vincent to the ground and handcuffing him as he thrashed and screamed about spies and conspiracies. Mike stood on the porch, gasping for breath, clutching his side where Vincent had struck him. It was over, or so they thought. The police took statements from the family, and Vincent was hauled away. Mike and Sarah were shaken, but they were grateful that the nightmare seemed to be behind them. But the next day, they received a call that chilled them to the bone. Vincent had been released. Apparently, there wasn't enough evidence to hold him for long. His erratic behavior, while disturbing, hadn't caused any permanent damage, and he hadn't been armed. The police told the Hendersons to be cautious, but admitted there wasn't much they could do unless Vincent did something else. For the next few weeks, the Hendersons lived in constant fear. They installed new locks, security cameras, and even considered moving. But they couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent was still out there, watching. Then. And he was. Though the noise stopped and Vincent didn't make any more direct contact with them, there were signs. Small things that only Mike and Sarah seemed to notice. Footprints in the garden, the feeling of being watched when they were outside, the occasional knock on the wall in the dead of night. They called the police several more times, but by the time they arrived, Vincent was always gone. To this day, the Hendersons still live in that house, though they don't sleep as soundly as they once did. The cameras never capture anything, but they know Vincent is still there, somewhere, waiting. Because some nights, when the wind is still and the house is quiet, they can hear him. The faint sound of breathing just outside the window,